Hello everyone and welcome back to Killer Shrew Fans Killer Toy Reviews. Today we have before you the Papo Chilesaurus from their 2020 lineup. This video has been greatly delayed due in part to my procrastination and also Nanmu November, but I did want to get it finished and put out before my 12 days of reviews, since I usually prefer to wrap up Papo's original lineup during that series, and I didn't have time in the schedule for 2 Papo figures. Before we begin the review itself, I just want to say what a pleasant surprise it is to see Papo producing a relatively underrepresented species in model form. For a company that has made a name for themselves by piggybacking off the popularity of dinosaurs in media, it was extremely refreshing to see them doing something outside of the norm. Of course, Papo have been full of both good and bad surprises these past few years, but nothing was as surprising to me as the choice to make this little guy here. Chilesaurus is such a bizarre but important animal in the fossil record, and for Papo to be the first to produce it is a shock to say the least. Usually Collecta or Safari are the ones to jump on new findings, while Papo sticks to more classic dinosaur designs. And even though this out-of-the-box choice was somewhat overshadowed by the controversy of the Giganotosaurus, I wanted to be sure and give Papo some immediate praise right out of the gate for that. I think they definitely deserve it. But the concept of the figure aside, how does it hold up as an actually realized model? Well, let's take a closer look and find out. As always, we'll start off with the head of this Chilesaurus. Now, the detail here isn't as crisp as Papo usually makes it, but that's to be expected on such a small head. Seriously, the skull is smaller than my thumbnail. So the fact that Papo managed to make it look this good was a feat in and of itself. You can see the sort of suggestion of scales across the board with larger, more clearly defined ones on the lower mandible there. I love the sort of ridges up on the brow there. Those are very well done elements. Unfortunately for you anti-shrink wrappers out there, you have got a little bit going on here, but it's not nearly as bad as Papo have been known to do, and it's certainly better than the upcoming Safari Spinosaurus. Seriously, I still can't believe that that happened. Anyway, I find myself not even looking to those imperfections because the eyes on this Chilesaurus are so big and striking. You can see they've painted in multiple colors with an orange sclera, yellow iris, and black pupil. It feels incredibly bird-like, and it's so nice to see instead of just the basic yellow coloration we're used to. I also love how they're seated in the skull there with the darker eyelids rimming them. Really makes them pop and come to life. The beak has got some lovely weathering on it, and if this isn't Papo flexing, then I don't know what is. This thing has an articulated jaw, which opens to reveal those tiny theropod-esque teeth. Now, it's no secret that Papo have the whole articulated jaw feature down to a science. They are one of, if not the best company out there when it comes to putting this point of articulation on their figures. But honestly, I cannot think of another piece with this small of a head to feature such a point of articulation without any dip in quality. The joint feels nice and sturdy. The seam line, I don't even see them beyond the back of the head there. I'm thoroughly impressed with how well Papo pulled that off, and it's a great addition to this model. Moving down the body, I love the sort of lizard-like spikes behind the skull and on the throat. Those are nice touches. You've got some lovely folding skin behind the head there, and the muscle tones in that long neck seem to be very well handled. Then the base sculpt of the neck, as well as much of the body, is covered in minute, uniform details. Again, an impressive amount of work on such a small figure. Hitting the midsection, you can see those spikes above those lovely shoulder blades, and I'm a big fan of the pulling skin down around the arm there and around the rotating thigh. The spikes are present once again above the haunches, and you can see that the scale detail comes all the way down to the tip of that downward curving tail. And going back up the opposite side, same story, lovely scale details, nice, powerful looking thigh, lovely muscle tones in the midsection, and some great wrinkles at the base of the neck there as it cranes upwards. I really do love those spiny elements on the back and throat of this model. Really makes for some interesting breakup as we come back up to that teeny tiny but mighty head. The arms are very beefy on this little figure. A lot of muscle mass has been sculpted into them, and it is especially noticeable on the left weight-bearing arm. Now, this was a bone of contention for a lot of people, myself included, the hand being sculpted flat as it supports the creature on those two-fingered hands. For a lot of people, this was wrong because the wrist would have to be pronated to achieve this position, but as Dino Screen pointed out in his review of the model, a trackway was discovered where a large theropod decided to rake its fingers against the ground as it walked along, which kinda challenges our understanding of the flexibility of dinosaur wrists. So maybe like how bears aren't designed to walk on two legs but can move that way if need be, so too could dinosaur wrists flex in ways that weren't necessarily the default position. So no, maybe not how it should look, but maybe not necessarily outside the scope of reality either. Just goes to show we still have so much to learn and are very rarely 100% right when it comes to these animals. Now let's take a look at these legs. Some gorgeous musculature here in the thigh and calves. Those are very well sculpted. I'm kind of missing the folds of skin around the joints there. They are there, but just more rudimentary. That is a small complaint. The toe claws, like the finger claws, are done in black with some nice weathering, and the plate scaling on the back of the toes, though not a necessary feature, is quite well handled. I'm also just a big fan of how well the movement has been captured with the feet in general. I love the splayed toes on the planted foot, which gives the figure a sense of weight, and also how the other toes are bending and moving into one another as the foot is lifted off the ground. It captures a sense of movement quite well. Taking a look at the underbelly, one thing I find very intriguing is this sculptural anomaly in the pectoral region. That sort of large plate scaling is very interesting, and I kind of wish they had taken it further down the underbelly. It's a very eye-catching feature, but it kinda ends too abruptly for my taste. Beyond that, you really only have more of the same scale texture as on the rest of the body, but something interesting to note, this figure does include a cloaca, and it is blessedly clean, unlike Collectors or Safari's dark offerings. Now that's not something I typically care about on a model. I could take it or leave it, you know? I don't need a dinosaur butt sculpted into my figures, but it is worth noting here because Papo doesn't usually include that feature. Makes me wonder if they're going to keep doing it more down the line. Alright, let's talk paint. I know I sang praises to Papo for doing something unique when they produced this figure, but the color scheme here is still reminiscent of some paleo art I've seen of Chilesaurus. I don't know the artist off the top of my head, but the teal on the back of the neck, as well as the orange on the nasal ridges and yellowish underside, are very similar to that artwork. To Papo's credit, they did add some orange and brown on the body and tip of tail as well, but beyond that, it does look a little paint by the numbers. Normally, I would chalk this up to subconscious inspiration, but with Papo being known to find quote-unquote inspiration in really any dinosaur media, I'm sure they were directly emulating that artwork. Heck, even those throat spines, which I said I liked, were lifted from the artwork, now that I think about it. Original or not, I like the color scheme. I know there were plenty out there who didn't, but for me, it's bold, eye-catching, totally different from what Papo usually does, and I think it highlights the detail quite well. The transition in color, which can often be a disaster on vibrant pieces, is actually handled extremely well, right down to the change in the stripes from brown to dark green. For such an inexpensive figure, I think the coloration on this thing is very well done, and I'll certainly praise it because I don't want to see Papo going back to their dull browns and greens. Alright, no, I'm good. Alright, and now for the pose. We already kind of talked about this with the whole wrist thing, but you can see this Chilesaurus is sculpted, I want to say mid-stride, but that doesn't feel quite right. Yeah, the left leg and arm are planted while the right limbs are being lifted off the ground, but it doesn't feel like it's in a forward locomotion. It almost looks like it was crouched down and something has startled it and it's trying to get back on its feet. This is illustrated by the harsh curl in the neck and slight arch to the body. Can I be honest with you guys? The pose and proportions on this thing are my least favorite element. I know I just spent a little bit of time defending Papo's decision to sculpt this thing with its hand on the ground, but I'm just trying to be fair. I'm nothing if I'm not fair. But yeah, it's just not been a good year for Papo in regards to either pose or proportion, has it? This just looks clunky and awkward to me. Not at all like a gracile, lithe, creature, I much would have preferred something more akin to the Ceratosaurus or Acrocanthosaurus with a largely forward-facing posture, while the fingers, instead of the palms, were used as the third point of contact. Or, maybe just standing. I don't know when it was that Papo decided their models need to be in some super dynamic, action-heavy pose. A lot of their older stuff seemed pretty standard, but nowadays, it's been getting more and more hectic. Now, as far as the proportions go, really it's just the tail. The body and neck seem appropriately long, even if the pose is somewhat disguising the former, but once you hit the tail, it just peters out super quick and doesn't look nearly long enough or sturdy enough in relation to the rest of the body. This was a problem I had with the Giganotosaurus 2 and last year's Gorgosaurus, and I certainly hope those three models are not indicative of a trend of Papo giving their theropods rat tails going forward. Something else I feel I must mention is the seams. Seams are unavoidable on any model. It's a question of how well disguised they are. I already said Papo did a decent job of avoiding any unsightly crevices around the head with their articulated jaw, but for some reason the body has seams with flashing still on them. This is not something I've seen before with Papo, but it really cheapens the overall look of the figure, and I certainly hope this doesn't become something that happens more and more to their models down the line. Maybe it's the luck of the draw, but I feel like I've seen other people mentioning it, so just watch out for it, I guess. For a quick measurement, this Chilesaurus isn't exactly a big figure, coming in at around 5.5 inches long from beak to tail, or roughly 14 centimeters, and from the base to the top of the tail, you're looking at just over 3 inches, or roughly 8 centimeters off the ground. For size comparison, here it is alongside some of Papo's other small figures. First up, gotta bring in last year's Gorgosaurus, which was a surprisingly small figure for the price. Luckily, this Chilesaurus is much more affordable, and you can see their aesthetics are night and day. It's no question which one draws your eye more, and which one is going to just get lost against the sea of earth tones on your Papo shelf. Then of course we have the Papo Tupuwara, who is not going to stand unless I hold him there. This is Papo's smallest prehistoric critter to date, and as you can see, he can sort of look the Chilesaurus in the eye there, if that gives you any idea of the size on this model. Then why not? Let's bring in one more small Papo figure. It's the baby Triceratops, another small figure that comes up to just under the Chilesaurus's head there. Then of course we gotta bring in the Papo Velociraptor. Since this mold has been repainted so many times, if you collect Papo, odds are you have a version of this sculpt and can get a better idea of the size to expect from the Chilesaurus. And of course, here it is with the gold standard Papo comparison, the original squatting Rex. Wouldn't be a Papo video without that thing showing up to some extent, would it? The Chilesaurus is absolutely dwarfed by that big guy. And again, I'm sure you've seen one of these before, so you can get an idea of the size from the Chilesaurus. Then let's cap it off with its 2020 companion, the always popular Giganotosaurus. It almost looks like the Chilesaurus is crouched down, ready to pile drive the Giganotosaurus, and the Giganotosaurus is in turn quite surprised by the Chilesaurus's boldness. Really, posing some of Papo's models alongside each other just highlights the unintentional hilarity of them, doesn't it? And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Papo 2020 Chilesaurus. Overall, I quite enjoy this model. From a painting standpoint to the decision to go with such a unique offering in general, it's really just something completely different from Papo, which is worthy of celebration. As you all know, if you've spent any time on my channel, I'm a big fan of Papo's aesthetic, but I do feel like they've been stagnating somewhat over time. This shows them at least attempting to do something different, and even though it is far from perfect, it is quite possibly their best effort of the year in regards to dinosaurs. And because of that, I will say I do dig this dinosaur and do recommend it. It's not at all pricey, and somewhere in that $12 to $15 range, and if anything, buying this figure shows Papo that we are ready for unique species and bold color schemes rather than, the same old. Now granted, I hope they opt for more straightforward poses down the line and address features like proportions and those seams, but one step at a time, I guess. Now, as always, I want to know what you guys think of this model. This review is super late, so do you own it already? Are you still planning on picking it up, maybe as a holiday gift? And what strange species are you hoping to see next from Papo? Drop a comment down below, and as always, thank you so much for tuning into this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back for Killer Shrew fans' 12 days of reviews.